Let's put it all together now by creating a BPMN diagram for the business process, student books, and meeting with the program chair. This is a process that hopefully is familiar to students, and while we're going to create a highly simplified version of it, it should enable us to include enough of the symbols and have enough of a discussion around creating a basic BPMN diagram. To begin with, we're going to have to include pools for the two main participants. Namely, we're going to have student and we're going to have the program area. You can rename the pools by double-clicking on them and then getting into the text edit mode. So this will be my student. This will represent the program area. Within the program area, there are two roles that I'd like to represent. So I'm going to include lanes for those two roles. The first role is going to be the program admin. And the second role is going to be the program chair. Now that we've got these two participants, we can go about working through the tasks that each would complete. In this example, I'm going to model the tasks in both participants, but depending on your audience, sometimes it's not necessary to model all the tasks in all participants, and you can simply get by indicating message flows between the two pool boundaries. I'm going to stretch these lanes out so that we have some additional work area. And we can always readjust the sizes of our pools and lanes once we've completed. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here as well, just so that we can get a better view. I'll start by modeling the tasks that the student will complete. In general, when a student wants to book a meeting with a program chair, they're going to have to contact the program area and provide some information or details about the meeting they'd like to book. And then after some time, they should receive a response from the program area indicating whether or not their meeting has been booked or was not able to be booked, at which time the student would have to come up with some kind of an alternate plan. So we can indicate here using a start event. I'm going to resize these down a little bit. And this start event is going to be triggered when the student requires advising. So once this process has been triggered, we can start to drop tasks. So the first task for the student to complete, I'm going to resize this as well, will be to contact the program area. Oops. And I'm going to try to align this with my start symbol. Now to connect these two symbols, I'm going to use a sequence flow. These symbols exist within the same pool, so sequence symbol is the correct flow to use. There we go. Now once they've contacted the program area, they're going to wait for a response. And we could indicate that with intermediate event, but I'm just going to use the intermediate event for receiving the response. Again, the amount of detail that you put into your BPMN diagrams is up to you, but you can typically get by with a basic diagram at first and then add further details later once you get into the revision and analysis phases. So I'm going to include this general intermediate. Again, I'm going to resize it to match my previous and align it. And this will happen when the student receives their response from the program area. And once that response is received, one of two things is going to happen. Either their meeting was able to be booked or the meeting was not able to be booked. So since only one of those two options is going to happen, we can use an exclusive gateway to diverge our path or a flow to account for those two cases. Now in the case that the meeting is booked, I'm going to use my currently sized task symbol the student can add the meeting to their schedule. And in the case that the meeting was not able to be booked, then the student will have to evaluate their options. So perhaps they want to submit another request or seek advising or counsel somewhere else. After either of these two tasks, the process ends. So we'll include those process end or general end symbols in a moment. Let's wire up these symbols now using our sequence flows. Diagrams.net's pretty good with the snap feature to make connecting your symbols and aligning them super simple. Oops. And Control Z or Command Z, if you make a mistake, works to undo your changes, just like in other software. One thing we can do also with these sequence flows is if we're not happy with these angled flows, they kind of look a bit silly. There's also an anchor that you'll see here. It's in faded out blue, but if you select that, you can actually resize or reshape your flows so they're a little bit more elegant in the way that they appear. We want to annotate these two flows to indicate which direction we're going depending on the type of message that was received. So I'm going to select this top sequence flow and just indicate here that this is the flow to follow if the appointment has been booked. And this lower sequence is only going to be followed if the appointment was not booked. Finally, we can go back and add our final end symbols once the student has received their message. And I'll connect these up, with the general sequence flows as well. We can label these general end symbols to indicate what's happening. So in this example, we would be preparing for the meeting after the meeting has been scheduled. And in this case, we would be preparing a new plan. So from the student participant side of things, that pretty much accounts for all of the tasks that they would have to perform. Now we can move on and deal with what's happening in the program area. Again, here I'm going to stretch these out so we have a little bit more room to work with. So I'll first stretch out the pool. And then I'm going to stretch out these lanes. The trigger for the program area is going to be when the message is received from the student. And we cannot use sequence flows to cross these pool boundaries. So we're going to have to use a message flow. From the BPMN general area, again, there's a message flow icon here, but there's also a second message flow that has an envelope icon on it. Either is fine in this case since a message is going to be received, but the generic message flow number 1 symbol can be used for any message flows that you need to include in your diagrams. So I'm going to drop this on to our diagram here, and I'm going to connect this to the contact the program area task from the student, and we're going to drop this down into the admin area for the program area. Now this will trigger the process from the program area's perspective. We can label this message flow as well so that it's explicit what we're expecting. So this is going to be a request for a meeting. Or we could indicate that this is just a request message. Depending on how you want to label these flows or what your context of your business process is, you may want to change the language that's used. So this is a request message that's sent from the student to the program area. And then we can indicate here, I'm going to copy and paste my general start symbol to indicate that this is the trigger that begins the process at this location. And so the admin is going to receive the request. Now that the message has been received, we can kickstart the process here. Again, we're just going to model a very basic process for booking this meeting. Many more details could be included, but we want to keep things simple. So the process will roughly go as follows. The admin is going to, after receiving the request from the student, check the program chair's schedule to see if there's availability. If there's availability, then they'll ask the chair to approve the meeting and update their schedule, and then the admin will inform the student. If there's no availability for the meeting, then the admin will bypass any communication or tasks with the program chair and just inform the student directly. And at that time, the student will have been informed either that their meeting is booked or that their request has been denied because there's no availability, and this process will terminate. So we can include now our tasks for this process. To keep the sizing the same, I'm going to again just utilize copying and pasting previous tasks from the student location above, and I'm going to drop these down here. So the first task will be to check the chair's schedule. And we can connect that. And after the chair's schedule has been checked, now we have a decision. Either there's going to be availability or there's not. So we can expand our gateways. Again, this will be an exclusive gateway because either there's availability or there isn't. So we'll resize this, align it, and now we can connect. If there's availability, then we'll ask the chair to approve and update their schedule. So they'll approve the booking. And we can annotate this line here to indicate that they're available. After the booking's been approved, the chair will update their schedule. And at this time, the flow will go back to the admin so they can inform the student. There are two ways to indicate how this might be done. One will be to include a task of inform the student, and then have flows from both the exclusive gateway symbol and the update schedule task below connect directly to the inform student task in the admin area. This would be acceptable. There are many different ways to create your BPMN diagram. But one thing I find that this lacks is the explicit direction as to whether or not these flows can be expected at the same time, or one may only occur and not the other, which is to say they're mutually exclusive. So this is fine, but we can add more detail by including a second exclusive gateway that collects the flows, indicating that only one of these would be used. So I'm going to detach these two sequence flows. I'm going to move this task over a little bit, and I'm going to include an exclusive gateway to collect these two flows. This makes it clear that from this point on, only one of these paths will have been followed. And in both cases, we're going to move on and inform the student. From here, after the student gets informed, this process will terminate. And the request will have been processed. Finally, we can include the message flow from the informed student task up to the student pool to indicate that this is where they will receive the response. Again, we need to use a message flow because the communication is across pool boundaries. Now that this message flow has been attached, we can label it. So this will just be the meeting status. But you'll notice here that the arrow kind of passes right through the label that I had on this intermediate event. So what I want to do here is just update this so the text is clearer. And what we can do is I can select this symbol. Double clicking will put me into the text edit mode. And I'm just going to Command X, or I'm going to cut that text out and then click away from the symbol. And what I can do is from the general area over on the left symbol options, I can choose this text symbol. And if I click that, that'll drop a text symbol onto the page, and we can use this to annotate above so that it doesn't obscure the arrow coming in from our informed student task. So I'll double click and I'll Command V paste my text. Oops. And then we can move that up to make things much clearer. Zooming out, we can see that we've essentially completed this basic process. The triggering here of the student requiring advising gets them to contact the program area, and they send a message to the admin that's received in the program area. They check the chair's schedule, and if there's availability, they approve the booking. We can label the other options so that we're clear as to what it is. So there's not available. And if it is available, the chair approves the booking and updates your schedule. If there's not availability, we would move on to inform the student. And if the schedule's been updated, we inform the student. A meeting status gets sent and received by the student here. This indicates that the process is ended in the program area. And then upon receipt of the message, the student checks to see either that their meeting has been booked, in which case they add it to their schedule and prepare for that meeting, or it is not booked. They need to evaluate their options and prepare a new plan. From this stage forward, you're ready to go into an analysis phase to identify if there are any issues or weaknesses or ways that this process could be improved. If it can be improved by simply adding additional steps or rearranging particular tasks, then that would fall under the BPI characteristic of business process management. If, however, we decided to start from scratch, perhaps due to technological pressures, maybe new technology or societal pressures that require us to engage with the students in a more one-on-one or direct means, we might decide to start from scratch and scrap this process and begin from the ground up. The choice would be up to you. We could also move forward and just add additional details and additional annotations to the symbols. Given that we've only used the very general basic symbols in this process, we could add more detail. So for example, checking the chair schedule, if this were a manual task, we might decide to add the hand symbol or hand icon onto this task to indicate as such. You can find those additional icons and symbols here in the BPMN general area. We might also decide to indicate that checking the chair schedule requires the admin to actually obtain the data input of the chair schedule. So we could do something like drop a data object on the page. We can annotate or update icons that are inside. And we can then use a dotted line from the general area to connect these symbols. Starting very basically, we'll just add it as an object for data. So this indicates now that this task of checking the chair's schedule requires the data input of the chair's schedule. And we can continue in this way, adding additional details and annotations to improve the detail and be more explicit in our business process. Leaving it here and preparing for export, however, let's just finish this up by adding a title and saving it. So to add a title to our diagram, we can simply, again, from the general area, select the text symbol and drop that on the page. For this example, I'm going to label it Student Books a Meeting with Program Chair. Once that's typed out, we can stylize this. So I'll stretch it out. We'll align it to the page. And I'm going to increase font size, and we can boldface that title as well. Once you're happy with your diagram and you're ready to save it, from the File menu, you can choose to save. And now, because we haven't indicated at the beginning where I'd like to save the diagrams that I'm creating, we're presented with that option again of, hey, where do you want to put this? We can give this a name. So I'm going to call this BPMN Student Books Meeting. And the default XML format for draw.io or diagrams.net files will be selected. You don't need to change this. We'll just leave it as is. What this enables us to do is to save this in an XML format so that we could open it for editing later in the future. I'm going to save this to my device. So select device, and you should get the typical file save dialog box that pops up. This should save it to your browser's default downloads location. So in this example for myself, I'm going to choose Save File, click OK, and that will download it to my hard drive. Now that particular format will be useful for loading and editing back here again in diagrams.net. So if you were to come back and revisit the site and wanted to make some edits or changes in the future to this, or to just save it as a copy, then that's the way to go about doing it. And then you can, from here, choose to open from, and then choose your local device to find that file in the future. You can load it up into diagrams.net, and then you can make your edits. Okay. One other thing that you might like to do is to export this in a format that can be used to include in, for example, Word documents or PDF files. And that option would be the file export as. And you'll get a number of different options here for how you'd like to export this diagram. I'm going to choose PNG. And once you do that, you get a number of options for how you'd like to go about exporting it. So you can choose the size, whether you'd like to export a full page size or just enough to include the diagram, which is typically what I use. You can choose whether or not you'd like the background to be transparent. Because this is a PNG file, we can have transparent backgrounds. If you'd like the entire background to be white, then you could leave this unchecked. Typically, depending on how I'm going to embed this, I like to have the transparent background. And we want to include a copy of the diagram. So now we can choose to export. And again, we're going to get that Save As dialog. It's going to ask us how we'd like to save it. Because I've already saved this with a particular name, BPMN Student Books Meeting, it's already going to include that name here with just the simple PNG file extension. And it also gives us a little thumbnail here of what that diagram looks like. Again, I'm going to choose to save that to my local device. It'll save it as a PNG file so that I could use it in the future to embed in a Word document or anywhere else that I might like to use that image. And that's really all there is to creating a BPMN diagram in diagrams.net. I hope you found the tutorial useful, and I hope you're able to go through and complete your assignments. If you have any questions, please let me know.